Yo, what's up? It's Someone That's Someone, and welcome back to another story mix. Today, as requested, we have a handful of stories featuring shadow people, plus the Hat Man. If you don't know what shadow people are, it's pretty much what it sounds like. Shadows that are in the shape of people, but without an actual physical body to cast it. It's a pretty common hallucinatory effect, popping up on deliriums for the most part. But you'll see here, they can pop up on other substances too. And also, some of these do feature the hallucination of Hat Man as well. That is, a notable shadow figure, but with a top hat on, that's popped up in a ton of experiences for people. So it'll be interesting to see how these all relate and differ. And before we get into this, I just want to note real quick, most of these are taken from various points in time, so expect the quality to vary. But I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, so without further ado, let's dive right into this.
Convincing hallucinations. In freshman year of high school, I would be doing DPH every 2 weeks with doses above 400 milligrams. It wasn't a fun substance, but it was highly interesting, which is why I enjoyed it. Not to mention, the music euphoria of DPH beats any other substance I have done. DOB, LSD, weed, DXM, you name it. Here is 2 of those times. Keep in mind, I made a journal of my experiences. I had to use Grammarly because I would type thinking it was perfectly fine, but if I looked back or blinked, there was 10 errors in a sentence. All the vision I state were because of the notes I took down. Fun note, when doing DPH and trying to write the report on paper, look back at it sober and you will see that as it kicks in, your handwriting becomes more and more sloppy to the point it does not look recognizable. Anyways, on to the trip. 450 milligrams Diphenhydramine. I dosed the pills while talking to a friend over a voice call. No noticeable effects occurred after 30 minutes. Whenever I do DPH, I know it's kicking in when my heart rate is up really high and I have a heart palpitation. It's similar to how high my heart rate gets on weed, but with weed, the feeling seems very pleasurable, not on DPH. I decided to go take a shower, which is when the effects really kicked in. I kept hearing stuff being tipped over and cars passing by, and there would not be anyone there when I looked outside my bathroom window. When I did though, I would see some of my neighbors leaving from their houses. Those being real, but if I stared at them, their bodies would freeze, but they would continue to move in random directions. Like 1 minute they're walking forward, and the next their body freezes like a statue, and they go back the way they came from. The tree branches would dance on their own accord despite there being no wind, as if they moved the branch down, then stop, then move side to side, and stop, and ad infinitum. I would also see tire-sized spiders on the power lines, although they were ghost-like in appearance. The shower felt uncomfortably hot, and the water felt like spiders and insects were crawling all over me. On my way back to my room, I saw my shadow start to dance like in a rave despite me not moving when I came to observe. I go into my room to do, I really can't remember. I do remember watching my world map on my wall and seeing the color of the water change colors from blue to green to purple, then back. Not in a smooth motion, but it changed color suddenly in a predictable manner. I then don't remember much for what happened for an hour besides watching my water bottle on the counter violently shaking and appearing as if it was about to tip over and fall. It never did. I also apparently encountered my HTML teacher at the time through a closed-eye visual. What did we do? I have no idea. I also apparently encountered an alien blob break through a car windshield and steal the steering wheel of the car. This I knew wasn't real, but I didn't react oddly to it. I decided to head outside sometime during the peak, and upon stepping out, everything appeared to be like the world was in some ice age. This was like 1 a.m. Everything looked like it had ice all over them, and it was beautiful. I head down the street and see some ghostly woman holding some billboard saying nonsense, and 3 large dogs appear in front of her, also in ghostly appearance. I run away from the site to see some more nonsense, like fire hydrants, flying around where they were. After all that, I remember heading to sleep and being visited by the Monopoly man to take me into some advertisement and some other, again, nonsense. Then I wake up 8 hours later feeling exhausted. Diphenhydramine 550 milligrams. This happened a month before my first day of high school. I dose the pills at nighttime and go through the same cycle, get drowsy, heart starts racing, then the visuals appear. I saw shadow people in my room that were as tall as the ceiling, 8 feet or more. They appeared to not be hostile in nature and weren't aware of the fact that I existed. I did not feel threatened. I had a marble spider hang off of the ceiling to where I was sitting, and it appeared to move like a real once and head down towards me. This scared the shit out of me, and I jumped out of my seat several times to see if it was back to normal. Later on, I heard a loud party going on downstairs and people chatting up the stairs to my room. I thought I was going to get busted, but all sounds ceased as the footsteps reached to my door. I was relieved. I then had a water bottle on my floor that started to roll on its side vigorously, and little ghost lizards were of the water bottle material and were being formed on the plastic and running around me. I thought if one of them was going to touch me, I was surely going to die. I danced my feet around like a maniac for God knows how long, and I then remember staring at my forearm. My hand disconnected from the rest of my arm, and it became toy-like in appearance. Then I saw a bug on my forearm crawl on it, and that made me snap out of it. The bug appeared to be a cockroach with the features of a ladybug. I decided to try to listen to music, but DPH suppresses all motivations. I had to use all my strength to open up my playlist and play the songs. When I did, I was in disbelief. Each note sounded so clear and beautiful, like that of weed, but there is another element to it. DPH actually changes how the music sounds along with how you interpret it. Best way to replicate it is a lower pitch and an increased tempo. That's far from accurate, but close enough. I was in bliss listening to my favorite song while on drugs, Angel Eyes by Brisk and Ham. Each note sounded so amazing. It was bliss. After that's done, I saw thousands of spiders and one mega spider the size of my palm, and it commanded the tiny ones to launch at me and attack me. Oh noes, I reached for my lamp while being attacked by the ghostly spiders, and they disappear when the light turned on. DPH makes hallucinations more apparent in the dark. Then I saw a ghost of a firefighter emerge from my closet and walk towards me. It did look like a ghost except for its right arm. It was just a block that extended down from his shoulder to his waist. In fact, it looked like that of a classic Roblox character's arm. I had enough, and it was already about 4 hours in, and I head to bed. As I close my eyes, I find myself in a park with my family and friends, all sunny and beautiful scenery around me. I was able to fly, and I did believe I was there until I opened my eyes. I was actually disappointed that I can no longer fly, but then I saw my door open slightly and see some shadow person with white glowing eyes peeking in and walk around the hallway. I wasn't scared and head back to bed to only find I cannot sleep despite feeling the need to. The restless leg syndrome was very annoying, arguably the worst side effect of DPH. I reopened my eyes to be greeted with an old woman standing at my door. She was wearing a red dress and was smiling, in a benevolent way, like a mom would do at her baby. She proceeded to take my glow-in-the-dark light switch and move it around my wall in circles. This is the last thing I remember. I did fall asleep later and woke up feeling like absolute garbage. The dark end of the universe. One day I was really depressed, so I decided that it would be fine just to end it all. Even though looking back on it, that was a bad idea because I would have fucked up a few people. And looking back on how I went about doing it, I can safely say I regret my decision thoroughly. So I decided it would be a great idea to try and OD on a gram of DPH and a gram of DXM, a combo I thought would be deadly enough to end my life. So I bought a bunch of cheap DPH gel caps and some Robocough online and decided to give it a go. I sat in my room staring at the pills for what seemed to be at least an hour. Maybe it was less, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Eventually, I got the courage to take 2 whole cases of the 50 mg DPH gel pills. There were like 16 in each box. I couldn't finish them all, but I managed to down about 20 or so before I felt like I was going to throw up. 20 is approximately 1,000 milligrams, and I felt as though I should have taken more at the time, but I'm 100% glad I didn't. I downed 2 whole bottles of Robocough, which had 450 milligrams of DXM in them each. I threw up a bit in my mouth, but I managed to hold it down long enough for it to settle. Now, I'm a lightweight person. I only weigh 135, so this combo should have been enough to hypothetically kill me, but unfortunately it didn't, and instead, it took me somewhere I don't think I should have ever been. I took all of this at around 10:30ish, and I believe nothing really hit me till around 11:15. At that time, I had decided just to sit back and play some Lost Planet 2, my favorite game of all time, and reminisce before my demise, which I knew would be painful given the nature of overdosing. It was around that time, 11:15, that I started to feel the come-up effects of the DPH, a slight weightlessness that was very familiar to me, accompanied by a numb sensation that washed around my whole body. I was ready, but I knew I had a while before everything started really getting going. About 10 minutes after that, I began to feel the effects of the DXM, which made me feel warm and twitchy, and a bit energetic and excited. It was happening. I then stopped playing Lost Planet 2 and just sat staring at the screen for what could have been 10 minutes. The effects seemed to be hitting me a lot quicker than I thought they would, so I decided that it would be good to keep my mind occupied until everything had truly set in. It was around 11:30 that I began to get my first DPH hallucinations. I felt as if someone was whispering to me, and there felt like there was a presence near me that I couldn't explain. It was like something was watching me, not maliciously, but curiously. The walls began to shimmer and bend slightly as well, letting me know the peak of my high and eventual death was coming very quickly. I tried texting on Discord, but it seemed as if my fingers were moving too fast and too slow at the same time, and my vision seemed to lose its focus. I spent at least 20 minutes doing this before I gave up and looked at my controller. It was wiggling for some reason, but I paid no mind to it. Instead, I decided to keep playing my Xbox until I couldn't coordinate anymore. That's when the dissociative effects of the DXM began to start. I would constantly forget I was playing a video game, and I would end up thinking that I was in the game itself, which made me scared of dying, but at the same time, I couldn't move because my fingers weren't moving on the controller. I was just staring at the screen. Eventually, I managed to pull myself away from the screen to look at my Xbox and turn it off. All of a sudden, I felt like I was in it, like my soul had left my body and had somehow managed to get stuck inside of my Xbox. Something that threw me off for a moment before my mind snapped back to reality. I looked down at my controller, for no apparent reason other than the fact that I could, and saw that my controller was twitching and seemed to have wavy spider legs, which made me throw it and turn off my Xbox and go to my room. When I stood up, I couldn't really feel the heaviness of the DPH all too much, but I definitely couldn't walk. My legs were light and uneven, and my heart seemed to beat harder when I took a step. I eventually made it to my room and sat down and tried to draw for a bit. I don't know why I wanted to, but I tried to. I had a picture that I had already started working on, so I wanted to touch it up for a bit. This went on for about 30 or so minutes, putting the time at roughly 12:15. I started hearing voices again. This time they were much stronger, but they were gibberish. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, so I decided to loom up from my drawing, and standing in front of me was a clear figure made of what seemed to be translucent spiders. I freaked out and thought it was a demon, and immediately tried to take a picture of it, but it took me a while to, since I couldn't remember where the camera app was on my phone, let alone how to use it. Once I finally managed to snap a picture of the thing, I sent it to Discord. This is where my memory gets hazy. I remember trying to text and being scared of the spiders forming on my bed, and being told on Discord to find a mirror, which is something I had done earlier during the beginnings of my trip. It scared me and I nearly pissed my pants. But I don't remember actually getting up. All I remember is blinking and seeing myself sitting on my bed. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating around, aimlessly, through my room. I remember seeing a tall, dark, shadowy figure staring at my body, and it was wearing a shadowy hat. The Hat Man had found me. I got scared and tried to reach my body, but the more I tried, the further I got from it. It was like running in reverse. Then I think I blacked out, because I woke up laying on the floor of my living room, not knowing how I got there. My mind was basically gone at that point, and I couldn't really think. I was just staring at the ceiling. This is where things got particularly bad. I stared at the ceiling and it began to turn dark, and it began to twist and contort, and what seemed like shadowy tendrils began to approach me. I tried to move out of the way, but I ended up staying put as the DPH effects had set in completely. I felt like I was floating, yet heavier than a skyscraper. I assume I had fallen asleep when I managed to find myself into the living room, and a few hours had passed before I woke up. Why I woke up, I have no idea. I should have been dead because I could hear my heart beating in my ears, as well as whispers and shouts. My name was being called from all around me, and I wanted to look for who was calling my name. At this point, I was completely delirious most likely, and didn't know I was tripping. I looked at the ceiling and saw a giant spider, at least the size of a damn car, descending on me, and then I blacked out again because I don't know what I did about the spider. I came back to reality again, and instead of being in my house, I was in this weird room where all of my furniture was reversed and covered in what seemed to be millions of spiders and fur, and the furniture was twitching around. The room looked like it was static, and the TV was on, but the TV wasn't displaying anything. Instead, the screen would float off, revealing what seemed to be some sort of four-legged animal, before snapping back in place and doing the same thing over and over again. I recall looking around, but I don't really remember anything else about the room other than the fact that the walls were constantly shifting and breathing, as if they were alive or some sort of living machine. I also saw myself laying on the floor, staring up. This scared the hell out of me, because I looked at my body and saw that my skin was pale and there was a lot of drool coming from my mouth, as well as spiders. I could freely move around the room, so I decided to leave my body, as it made me realize that I had in fact died, or at least I thought I did. I kept pacing my room back and forth, but no matter where I walked, I always ended up in the same spot I awoke in. Eventually, I began to hear shouts and screams and what seemed to be some sort of viola playing, but it was heavily distorted and seemed far away, yet at the same time, it was almost omnipresent, as if it were the soundtrack for this decrepit world I had found myself in. The whispers and voices turned to screams until one of them said, "He's here." That is the only voice I can clearly remember, and it sounded like the whisper of a deceased friend I know. Well, used to know. But it scared me. It didn't seem natural. It seemed like a warning. So instinctively, I looked around the room and noticed that everything was darker and more demented, and there were shadow people phasing in and out of the walls and gathering around this thing that I couldn't see. Their heads were twitching really fast, and the longer I stared at them, the more they seemed to be made out of insects with hundreds of legs. They all of a sudden stopped twitching, and they just disappeared. I don't remember anything else from that moment except seeing a tall, lurching shadow person that had 6 arms and orange dots for eyes. It screamed at me and told me horrible things, none of which I could decipher, but somehow I knew what it was saying anyway. It kept repeating a mantra about how the world was coming to a close for humanity, and it repeated the numbers 2032. This scared me, but it wasn't a normal fear, it was a primal one. A fear that had told me that I was in the presence of something immense and powerful, a deity, a god, but a demonic one. After that, my memory fades. I don't remember what I did, or when I woke up, or how I ended up in my bed, but I can recall opening my eyes for a moment and seeing the sun through my room window, and seeing the Hat Man walk out of my room. He said, "I'll see you soon," and that was it, before I closed my eyes. I don't know how much time passed between then and when I regained full consciousness, but when I was finally able to wake up and look around, I remember checking my phone and seeing that it was 2 p.m. March 16th. I had taken the DPH and DXM on the 14th, meaning I was delirious for what seemed to be 2 full days. I noticed that my thoughts were nearly non-existent, and every few minutes I would have uncontrollable full-body muscle spasms and blackouts, to the point where I would spasm, then black out, only for it to happen again. I was terrified and managed to call my boyfriend to come to my apartment, but even that took what was probably 15 to 20 minutes to actually do, as I could barely type and barely see. I couldn't speak very well either, but I think I managed to say something right, because about 10 minutes after I had made the call, my boyfriend showed up and used the spare key I had to open the door and came in. He sat with me on my bed, but I was having hallucinations and blackouts still, and I couldn't tell if he was real or not. He told me I would start talking to the air, then stop and look at him before saying, "What did you say?" And I don't remember any of it. I don't remember a large chunk of my trip other than the time I spent in what I could only assume was Ariel itself, or something close, or far worse than it. It's been 3 days since I took that shit, and I still have vivid hallucinations, as well as blackouts and spasms. My vision is bad, and I have to squint to read, but I can basically function somewhat normally. Apparently I threw up a lot during my trip because I was covered in bile stains and blood and threw up a lot today, most of it being bile and blood as well. I didn't eat or drink anything for nearly 2 days, and I have Discord texts that I sent that I have no memory of actually sending. My furniture has throw up on it too, so I'll have to clean my couch whenever I can actually walk and move normally. My heart felt like it has stopped at least 3 times, twice during the trip, and once before I took a nap earlier today and blacked out again. And there are strange markings on my wall from a marker that I have no idea where in the hell it could be, and I still see large black spiders materialize on my walls and near my legs. My boyfriend is staying with me for the remainder of the week to make sure I don't die, and to make sure I don't attempt suicide again. I'm surprised that I'm alive, honestly. The effects of both drugs are still very strong, though it's more the DPH than the DXM, even though when I look at my hand, it doesn't feel like it's mine, and I have flashes of seeing myself laying on my bed with my man. I wish I could remember more of what happened, but judging from the things I do remember, I don't think I really want to. As the spirit wanes, the form appears. This is an account of several trips with inhalants. Philosophical babble. I took my philosophy degree at the university with the theme Creativity and Language. At the time I was finished, I was convinced that creativity appears as a shift of a form or an image from one common use in a language system to a new one, and the process is not logical, as being capable to describe all the steps, but appears as a sudden jump. That jump is a synthesis not made consciously. For example, I took a bath and I watch as the water flows on my watch. I suddenly come up with the new idea to draw a liquid watch. I've read Jung's works on archetypes and decided that the best way to find out if archetypes existed and had something to do with creativity is to try to experience them. The obvious choices were hallucinogens. I decided to use acetone after I've read an article about it. First trip. There I was sitting with a tub of glue and a plastic bag. All my work had never prepared me of what I was about to experience. After several huffs, the sound started to repeat in a loop. And there it was. It risen from deep inside of me, an ancient being, and it looked at the world around, took a deep breath, and laughed. It was happy to live again. In Jung's concepts, this would seem to be the shadow. It is important to make the notice that at the time, I have not read the Jung publications about the various archetypes, only a general account of what an archetypical image is. I, on the other hand, was afraid that I was caught in an endless helix. But the shadow said, "No problem, we are in a loop universe. No worry. Here you'll meet yourself and leave yourself." And it started talking to me how different types of drugs catch people in different persons, the persona. The trip was over in 15 minutes. Second trip. Next day I decided to continue. The shadow again welcomed me. It was more clear in image this time. It had a nice sense of humor, the trickster or the fool. It resembled at the same time a fool or a very organized man. It was not within me, but as a different persona. As the trip was getting to its end, all the hallucinations centralized as an upside-down echo that returns to its center or maker. The trip was 30 minutes. Third trip. This was more extreme. I was listening to Björk at the time. The shadow showed me an empress or a goddess, the anima. I've read the chapter on the anima, but it concerned mostly females, So again, it appeared by itself, not from what I've read. Of course, the Song of Bjork was the raw material with which the image developed. The goddess is very fair and cruel. Anyone who tries to marry or kiss her dies. Only a magician can trick her, said the shadow. I am a magician, said I. Oh, you fancy yourself a trickster. Can you reach me? Can you kiss me? Echoes the voice of the goddess from above. Yes, I can, said I. Then two ghosts appeared, red and blue. They manifest in reality only with an automatic gesture or a phrase. They are at war with each other, wins by whoever manages to express himself the most in the world, said the shadow. The Empress said, there are different levels of being. A simple phrase repeated is one, a gesture another, much like a human being, but it lives in the lives of others without considering consequences. The flesh is a thought put into a fact. A thought passes within and through flesh to become a fact. It's both the lowest and the highest. A free thought is such that needs no flesh to appear, said both the queen and the fool as a choir. With their words I saw colors, abstract shapes, and geometric forms. The biggest pain is to live with consequences, was the final echo from the drug. This trip was 40 minutes long. Before the fourth trip, I discovered the formal resemblance between hallucinations and mythology and fairy tales. I decided to use some method of magic to concentrate myself within the trip. I read extensively through different mythological texts. I had an important dream. Horus appeared as a number, both 3 and 4. Again, I read about the mythological meaning of the numbers afterwards. At the time I awoke, the only thing I could put up was that they equal 7. The fourth trip. I sit on my knees and try to focus. I'm like Alice in Wonderland changing size. The shadow appears and shifts to a monk who will teach me now. He shows me an image of a flower on the flower. This is the most important thing, said he. Afterwards, I read about Mandela and how it corresponds to the blossoming flower of the rose. This trip was 40 minutes. Fifth and last trip. The goddess and the shadow present me in a grand golden amphitheater. There are all the gods from all the grades and levels of being. You have been chosen to be an emperor, said a golden figure. Old man sitting in a throne. The old man. I can't. Look at me. I'm nobody, said I. Stop acting as a spoiled child. You have been chosen. You've passed all the tests. A choir of all beings echoes. The trip lasted 2 hours. At that point, I was afraid of the megalomaniac structure of the hallucinations and stopped experimenting. Conclusion. The archetypical origin of the hallucinations was quite obvious, but there were a lot more than a display of old mythological figures. The way different ideas were presented with shapes and colors was a proof of my concept about creativity. At last, there was one thing which lies beyond my logical means of explaining. These experiences changed my conscious perception of the world and myself. The only way to describe them now is a synthesis between spiritual and rational thoughts, in the broadest possible meaning of these two words.
I tried to let it in and set it free. It wallows still, consuming me. Intro and setting. A few years ago, in the garage at my grandma's house in Scotland, it was a cold, dark, and quiet winter night. I sat with my 2 friends, who we'll call Alec and John. Hour 1. We were smoking some Trainwreck, cannabis, and this stuff was highly potent. I suggested that one of my friends and I take 1.5 grams of dried Liberty caps each. We smoked weed for a starter by rolling ridiculous-sized joints. Then we took the shrooms, and within an hour of taking them, I started tripping and began to feel perplexed. Back then, I could always compose myself, and I always helped my friends who got too messed up, and so I convinced myself that this tiny dosage was only going to give me some minor visuals and maybe some insights. But no, you see, combined with blunts and joints of potent cannabis, it took me towards level 3. I was able to control my thoughts, but I was very suspicious as to why I was tripping more intensely than expected. My other friend kept asking why we were acting weird, but every time he did, it would snap me out of the trip, and I would act normal for a few minutes. Later, I discovered I had been judging my dosage based on a much weaker mushroom, the cubensis. Hour 2. My non-tripping friend left, and this is when I ran upstairs after suggesting we take 5 grams out of false bravado, as if to say, oh, that 1.5 grams was nothing. Anyway, I go upstairs and weigh out 5 grams each for me and Alec, go downstairs, and we both finish the shrooms while watching some documentary. While waiting on the effects, I feel them creep up on me, and after only 10 minutes, my vision becomes comprised of complex geometry. My skin is flushed, and my heart was beating faster than normal. The intense sedation and intense hallucinations set in shortly after. At this part of the trip, I was enjoying how intense the hallucinations were. The air in the room seemed to take on a liquid form, comprised of interlocking patterns that vibrated erratically. I would wave my hand and see it disturbing all the particles around me. It was as if every wall and every object was alive. Everything was swirling, and at points, the air looked like writing, which was sort of guiding me through the trip. I looked at my friend and demanded he changed what we were watching. I didn't want to watch some documentary that was basically incomprehensible while tripping this hard, so I put on The Simpsons, and I looked at him and asked, "Are you feeling this yet?" He said no, and I remember this made me feel alone on this super intense come-up. Hour 3. I was approaching ego death, and I could not put together any of my thoughts or memories, so I just closed my eyes and traveled into a virtual world, filled with neon green lights and black space. Behind it, I was a player in this game, and I was moving rapidly through it as if I was swimming through consciousness. Looking back on this was in an episode of Dexter's Laboratory I seen as a kid. Soon after that, I opened my eyes as I start to remember what's going on. I notice that I am looking down on myself, floating above my body as if I'm a player in a video game. I tried to look at my friend, and he said something to me which sounded like nothing I had ever heard before. The only way I can describe it is it's as if he spoke in every language at the same time. His voice sped up, slowed down, and then sped back up. I kept saying, "What?" and I then realized that I am stuck in a loop. It felt like an eternity. This is when shit gets weird. The loss of visual connection to reality was so severe that everything looked exactly like The Simpsons. I looked at my friend, and his face was transforming into all the characters from the show at once on a continuous cycle. Mumbled voices of Bart, Lisa, Homer, and Marge filled my mind. Their voices made a trippy, distorted anti-melody, and although this was utter chaos, every sense in my body was hallucinating in a pattern of sorts. My vision completely shifted, and I was now physically seeing the world in 2D. As strange as this sounds to a non-tripper, it was even stranger to the tripper. I was in the Simpsons cartoon, and my sense of reality, time, and humanity are gone. I know not of time. I'm starting to shake. My hallucinations at this point are indescribable. I somehow stand up rapidly and begin to walk as if everything in my visual field is falling away from me. It was as if I was on a sinking ship. Suddenly, I felt a painful electric shock, and my brain gets a sudden jolt. My pineal gland felt as though it had just exploded, and an all-encompassing sound arose as my ears popped. Somehow, I pull through and get into my house. I go upstairs to take a piss, end up knocking a few things over, and then remember my grandma is sleeping. Somehow, I was thinking a little more with clarity at that point. I then went downstairs, sat down by my back door, smoked a cigarette, and tried to cope with the idea of tripping in my freezing garage for hours on a level 5 approaching trip. I remember looking at my backyard as if it was a digital alien world. As I looked up, there were visuals of geometric spider webs all around me. I was in a sort of dome, and everything was electric and pulsating. If I stared at anything for too long, I would get stuck in. What appeared to me as a mixture of all senses would turn into some random nonsensical plot, like a cartoon, and as I viewed it, it would pulsate through my body. I remembered my friend was still waiting for me in the garage, so I go back in. I start to smell burning, and I alert my friend, who says nothing is wrong. I tried to look at the heater that was on, but couldn't see if it had melted the plastic or not. My vision was playing way too many tricks on me. I ask him if his shrooms have kicked in yet, and he says no. This is beginning to mess with my trip. I couldn't understand how I was so fucked up, and he wasn't. I tried to sit there and pretend I wasn't about to trip out, and this created thought loops, and along with the coldness of the garage, with great guilt, I tell him I'm going in the house, and he needs to leave as I'm approaching a level 5 trip. I couldn't concentrate on my body temperature. He tried to make me feel guilty, and understandably so. I mean, I had just given him 6.5 grams and told him to walk home, but I had to get out of the cold. I hope he made it home safe, and I nearly went back out to get him, but luckily he didn't start tripping until he made it home. As he walked away from my house, I started getting very paranoid. For one, he could get hit by a car or something, and two, because I felt like he knew I had just acted like a pussy that couldn't handle my shrooms. Along with this realization, I thought that everything in my head had been public all along. Every secret I held, every bad thing I'd done was obvious all along. The privacy I thought I had was an illusion. As I fell deeper into the abyss, my mind tried to fight against it. I ran upstairs as quickly as possible before I wasn't able to walk. I remember I looked into my room and was frozen in shock as there appeared to be a full-sized jaguar sitting on my couch. It growled at me and began to come towards me. I immediately turned on the lights and realized that it was just my jacket. I then tried to leave the light on, but the visuals were making me extremely dizzy, so I shut off the lights and curled into the fetal position on my bed. My recollection at this point was hazy, because this is where my trip had peaked. As I laid in the darkness, my body and mind seemed to slide away even further, and the hallucinations were getting very sinister. I see shadow people, and every time I try to glance straight at them, they appear to be running away from my line of vision. Imagine you see someone running around the corner of a building with a flashlight on them. Their shadow gets taller, then it disappears. That is what I was seeing. I heard unintelligible voices seemingly trying to contact me. All 5 of my senses seemed to have become one. I began to think that I had picked the wrong mushrooms. This trip felt more like a poisoning than psychedelic. My room was covered in faces, not actual faces, but expressions of disgust and entities that seemed to toy with me. Whenever I got scared, they would laugh at me. I was listening to the Aphex Twin song Window Licker before this trip, and I remember hearing it play on repeat. At one part of the song, the creepiest part of the song, I heard it clear as day, not just when you hear something in your head, but as if it was actually playing. As I lied there in pure terror, eventually my body goes cold and my chest tightens. I began to choke. My esophagus was completely dry. Then everything disappears. Desperately wanting to live, I sat up quickly, ran to my bathroom, and drank as much water as I could before running back to bed. I considered phoning an ambulance, but luckily I didn't have to resort to that. But whenever I have such bad trips, it's always in the back of my mind. As I desperately tried to grasp onto what was left of my reality, I kept tensing my muscles to make sure I was still there. My bed covers felt like they were a part of my body. I had completely lost myself. There was no self anymore. I tried to think of my family and friends, and every time I did, I could only think of the feeling they gave me. I was having distorted and weird visions as I tried to remember who I was and where my place in the world was. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I was born into this family with this mom, this grandma, and so on. Why aren't I an insect, fish, or animal? This sounds stupid, I know, but While tripping this heavily, you realize how very weird all of that is. All I envisioned was mysterious, unrecognizable worlds with strange dialogues. With my eyes closed, I was falling down a black hole filled with images of distorted parts of who I think I am, fading from real to bizarre, like complete distortions of everything imaginable. I could travel back to the old and sometimes random times in my life. It was not so much an actual memory, but more like a roller coaster of feelings, expressions, and clips or random periods. Suddenly, everything faded to black. Everything I was struggling to grasp onto didn't matter. This is it, I thought. I had done it this time. I was dead. I had forgotten I was on a drug, and everything I knew about my life slipped away. I then envisioned that I was a fetus. Am I in the womb? I see my entire life flash before my eyes. I am born. I am in my nursery. I am at school. I am in high school. I am in college. I am at my first job. Everything in my life was just relived up until the point I took the Liberty caps. As the psilocybin left my body, I remembered who I was again. I felt as if I had been reborn in every sense. I would describe this trip as terrifying and thought that there would be lasting, detrimental mental effects. As soon as the shrooms leave your body, though, they're gone. It's not like acid, where you still get slight visuals afterwards, perhaps because mushrooms are a natural hallucinogen. This trip report doesn't convey the real emotional roller coaster that I went on, but to this day, thinking about it still gives me fear. I'm still trying to make sense of what that was. I don't think I will ever know. What did I learn from this experience? The mind is extremely powerful. There's something beyond this world. I accepted my own death. Life is the real trip. Never again will I take or have ever taken such dosages in bad conditions. I stopped smoking cigarettes for a while after this trip and stopped drinking as much. I've cut down on cannabis consumption as well. I will never ego dose again. It's helped me create psychedelic effects in my music and has driven most of my work in university. I now only use them in spiritual settings, and I'm a solo tripper. I will only sometimes trip with one other trusted friend. I have been trying to pursue a career in music and make psychedelic music and videos, and I am certain that my life work will be adding to both the psychedelic community and music scene in some way. Sinister Delusions. Alright, so I'll start by saying that the brand of medication I used for this experience, Travacalm Original, should be avoided at all costs. Not only is Dimenhydrinate composed 50% of a caffeine-like stimulant, each pill also contains 20 milligrams of caffeine each, meaning when taking recreational doses, there is a very large quantity of stimulants factored in with the DPH and scopolamine. This can lead to a lot of added anxiety to the experience, as if there wasn't enough already, and heart problems. I had prepared myself for a 500 milligram Dimenhydrinate experience after researching online about the substance and reading up on several reports, but I did not take into consideration the hyoscine, or scopolamine, 2 milligrams, that would come with taking 10 tablets. I found little information about scopolamine doses online, but I can assume that it potentiated the experience looking back, especially the negative physical effects, such as inability to talk, walking difficulties, and blurred vision. It seems this was the only available over-the-counter medication in Australia with DPH, as I cannot find any others with just pure DPH, such as Benadryl. Anyways, on with the report. I never thought that I'd be writing a trip report, but after my awful first, and hopefully last, delirium experience that happened a few nights back, I felt like I needed to submit this report. There were many things that I did wrong in this experience, which ultimately led to me being caught by my parents and almost being sent to the hospital. I have read many reports on DPH, enough to understand that having a positive experience with this substance is almost impossible. But deliriums have always fascinated me more than any other drug category. The fact that they can cause true hallucinations, which are just as convincing as reality, is interesting enough. but many people report the same hallucinations: phantom cigarettes, spiders, shadow people, the Hat Man, etc., which convinces me that there is something more profound at play, even if it is dark and very sinister. I figured that I would try DPH just once to know what it was like. This was my first mistake. After looking at over-the-counter products at the local chemist, I could only find Travacalm with DMH, which is 50% DPH. I was reasonably smart with my dose. I figured I would take an equivalent of 250 milligrams DPH, a good dose for a first time, considering I've taken LSD doses up to 300 micrograms and have never had a bad trip. My setting for this experience was terrible. I took the 10 pills at 9 p.m. right after saying goodnight to my parents and closing my bedroom. The reason I thought this would be okay is I've done the same thing on an acid trip and a few DXM trips, and I've never had any issues. My state of mind was always fine throughout. I knew that deliriums were a lot harder to handle than psychedelics, but I was only taking 250 milligrams of DPH, so I knew I would be reasonably connected to reality while still experiencing a couple hallucinations, and maybe some music enhancement. At the time, I thought the 2 milligrams of scopolamine wouldn't have too much impact on the trip, as it wasn't a big dose, which was stupid of me considering it's one of the main substances in datura and probably synergized with the DPH. After only 30 minutes, I felt a tingly sensation in my feet and a general dullness that fell on my mind. My thinking was starting to slow, and I felt some minor relaxation that swept my body. As I continued to come up, everything felt vague, as if I was living in a vivid lucid dream. My vision became overlaid with grainy static like that on a TV. Looking at my ceiling and walls, I saw translucent, shadowy shapes and patterns drift along the surfaces. Unlike the geometry I seen on psychedelics, these patterns seem random and abstract. Looking at my arm, I noticed the same thing, only now I begin to see the outlines of faces form on my skin and then fade away shortly after. I decided to go on Reddit and read up a bit more on the drug before I start to peak. After only 5 minutes or so of reading, my vision starts to get blurry fast. My guess is the scopolamine potentiated my blurred vision because I had no idea the extent to which my vision would be impaired. I could no longer read any text, even if I zoomed in. This was when my experience started to plummet into utter discomfort and borderline insanity. I noticed that I needed to pee, bad. The thing about my house is that my parents' room is very close to mine, with the bathroom in between both rooms. Usually there isn't an issue when I go to pee on DXM or LSD, as my mind is always in a positive place, and I can still walk properly. If my parents ask if I'm alright, I'd be able to respond with something like, "Yeah, I'm fine," and continue back to bed. However, the moment I stood up, I knew this was going to be an issue. The body load I was experiencing was insane, so much greater than I expected. When I was able to heave my leg in front of me to take a stride, my balance and coordination were beyond fucked, causing me to crash into my bedroom door. At this point, my mind is jumbled and my thinking was impaired, yet still clear enough that if I ran into my dad on the way to the bathroom, there wouldn't be an issue, or so I thought. After stumbling to the bathroom, I missed the toilet when I went to sit down and almost fell on the floor. This puzzled me. I could have sworn I was facing the right way. After I pee, I head back to my room, trying my hardest to walk straight, and I made it without running into my parents. At this point, it was probably just over an hour since I dosed, and I'm regretting my decision. I couldn't figure out exactly why, but I felt incredibly uneasy and nervous, so I turned out my light. I figured that with my light out, if I saw a disturbing hallucination, like a massive spider, I could just close my eyes and put my headphones on. As soon as I turned out the light, I was majorly disoriented. Where am I? I thought to myself. I knew I was in my room, but at the same time, I had forgotten the layout of my room and ended up walking to the complete wrong side of my room looking for my bed. I grabbed my phone and put the flashlight on to find my bed. Once in bed, I saw the patterns and lines on my blanket turn into worms and bugs, but only for a second. Once I inspected them closer, the visual stopped. This didn't disturb me too much because I knew I was hallucinating. However, this overwhelming feeling of dysphoria persisted. I could barely lift my arm to reach for my headphones, and my body just felt gross. It was then when I got into a loop of trying to put in my left earbud, only for my mind to drift to another thought and forget completely what my task was, only then for me to realize what I wanted to do a minute later and for the process to repeat. This happened 5 or 6 times before I was able to put my earbud in, which was a lot more difficult than it should have been. I put on some ambient music and I get some decent music euphoria, which relaxes my mind a little bit. With music in, I felt more disconnected from my room as I couldn't hear what was going on around me. This worried me because it made the possibility of having a disturbing visual be more pronounced. I closed my eyes and focused on the music only to open them periodically to inspect my room, getting scared and closing them again. Getting into loops like this happened throughout the night due to my short-term memory going to utter shit. I've gotten onto loops on LSD before, but these loops made me feel helpless, mainly because whatever I was trying to do became incredibly difficult due to the physical limitations, meaning it may take 10 minutes to pick up a bottle of water or to pull up the sheets, etc. I really don't understand why people take this substance for music enhancement. I find that MDMA, LSD, DXM, and even Vyvanse make music infinitely better than it sounds on DPH. This is probably since the clusterfuck of negative effects outweigh that one single positive. I completely lose track of time and find that I need to pee again. I repeat the process of going to the bathroom, only this time my dad confronts me on my way back to my room. He must have heard me running into walls and got up to check on me. The main thing that completely caught me off guard with this drug was my inability to talk properly, which is what led to me getting busted. Every time I talked, my words were slurred really badly, as if I had 20 shots of vodka, and I wasn't making much sense. I would often forget what I was just asked, just seconds after it being asked. My memory is a little sketchy, but I'll try and recall the conversation. Dad: Hey, are you alright? Me: Yeah, I'm just peeing quite a lot. I had too much tea before bed maybe. I'm just gonna go to sleep now. Dad: You're obviously really drunk. How many drinks did you have? Me: Yeah. I had a few drinks. Dad: You're off your face. How many did you have? You need to tell me. Me: 2 shots. Dad: You did not have 2 shots. You're swaying on your feet and your words are slurred. You must be on something harder. Are you on acid? You need to tell me. I know this isn't just alcohol. We went back and forth like that for a couple of minutes. I insisted I was only drunk, but I kept saying I only took 2 shots for some reason. If I was in a better state of mind, I would have just said I downed a bottle of vodka or something, but I wasn't even thinking straight. Eventually, I knew I had to fess up. My mom was up now and interrogating me too. I decided to come clean. I told them, yes, okay, just come into my room and I'll show you. I take my parents into my room, intending on showing them the empty box of Travacalm, but not only 10 seconds later, when I sit down on my bed with my parents in my room, I completely forget why I took them into my room. I just sit there on my bed, staring off into space for a good 20 seconds or so. During this time, I hallucinate my dad wasn't in the room and it was just my mom. But she wasn't my mom, she was my cousin. This seemed completely normal to me at the time, even though it made no sense whatsoever. I completely snap out of it when my dad shakes me and asks me again what I took. I reach into my drawer and show them the box. They freak out and call Poison Helpline to see whether or not I had to go to the hospital. During this whole process, I'm nowhere near as shaken up as I should have been. It's like I was numb to the emotions I normally get during a situation like this. There was just this constant unease and discomfort that had been present the whole trip. Nothing had changed. I wasn't full-blown delirious, so I managed to avoid getting sent to the hospital. My parents were really shaken up about the whole thing, understandably so, but they leave me and go to bed. I turn my light out and immediately see my phone, face up on my bed, display on, and illuminating half of the room. Standing next to my bed, I reached down to pick it up, only to realize my phone wasn't on my bed, it was on the floor. I had hallucinated my bed, as I was on the complete opposite side of my room. On top of this, I saw my bedroom door where one of my windows should have been. Everything was completely out of whack. Turns out my phone wasn't even there. It was on my bedside table where I had left it. On my desk, I see a giant centipede slowly crawling, which turned out to be a sock, and a giant spider, which was actually on my keyboard. Even though these sights were disturbing, I was strangely numb to the fear, partially because I knew I was just seeing things. I began hearing family members and friends calling for me. Most of it sounded distant, as if it was coming from outside. A lot of it was random and didn't make any sense, like a friend saying, "Hey, I broke my leg. You need to mow the lawn before someone gets hurt. Quick, the sun's almost down." All of the auditory hallucinations had a sense of urgency, and all of them wanted me to leave my room and do something. I knew better, though. It felt like a sinister entity was deceiving me. I lie in bed, just wanting to go to sleep, when I have the most profound hallucination of my trip, one that I did not expect to have on this low of a dose. I see my friend from school sitting legs crossed in the middle of my room. He's got my phone on the ground facing up with the password lock screen. I watch for at least a minute as he retries random passwords to hack into my phone. Eventually he gets in, even though the password he entered wasn't even mine. I say, "Hey dude, that's my phone. Can you chuck it here?" He looks at me and laughs. "Oh shit, my bad. Here you go, man." He extends his arm to me, offering the phone. I reach, but my hand goes right through it. Then he vanishes. Damn, where'd he go? I thought. During the whole time, I thought nothing of him being there. It seemed completely normal to me. It wasn't until the day after I thought back and realized I hallucinated the entire thing. After that, I fall asleep relatively easy and woke up feeling mentally drained, despite having slept for 9 hours. Looking at my ceiling, I was still seeing vague patterns, but I was glad to know the trip was pretty much over. All in all, I'm glad that I experienced the delirium, despite being caught, because I found it very interesting. Like every single other person who's made a report on a delirium, I strongly advise no one ever touch this stuff, but if you are anyway, make sure that you stay away from Travacalm, because the concoction of drugs in their pills is complete and utter fuckery, and I haven't got half a fucking clue why this shit's over the counter, like physically harmless drugs like LSD will land you in jail. Not only do they have DMH, but scopolamine and caffeine too? Jesus.